Good afternoon, or good morning to you West Coasters, and welcome to Food Processing's webinar, Are Your Hoses Compromising Your Food Safety? I'm Dave Fusaro, editor of Food Processing Magazine, and for starters, if you're hearing me, you apparently have no problem with the sound, but if you are having any problems hearing or viewing today's webcast, first try to log out and log back in. And if you're still having trouble, explain your problem in that ask a question / technical assistance box, which should be second one on the left of your screen, and one of our IT people will email you back immediately. Some other housekeeping issues. On your screen, you should see 5 sections. The upper left or audio section allows you to adjust the volume of this presentation. Just hover over one of those smiling faces and you'll see the speaker button appear. Right below the audio section is that Ask a Question box, and that's where you should send a question that we will answer at the end of today's webcast, or maybe at an opportune time in the middle. But at any time during the webcast, you can enter your question there. There's also a handout section, I think to the right of your screen, where you can find a complete set of today's PowerPoints and speaker bios, as well as some collateral materials from our sponsor, Parker Hannifin. You need a better view? You can enlarge the section by clicking on the box in the top right corner of the section next to the X, or by dragging the borders of a section. But don't hit the X. If you do accidentally close out a section, you can get it back by clicking the refresh button, which should be at the top of those light green icons at the left of your screen. And this webinar will be archived. We encourage you to direct coworkers to the recorded presentation on the foodprocessing.com website. Our webinar today is sponsored by the Hose Products Division of Parker Hannifin Corporation. In a minute, you'll hear from these two guys, Dylan Shamakian, Product Sales Manager in the Fluid Connectors Group, and Matthew Davis, Business Development Manager. They're going to try to raise your awareness of the role hoses, especially the proper hoses, play in your food safety regimen. It's not a topic to be taken lightly. Every survey we at Food Processing take, every processor we talk to puts food safety as their number one priority, and rightly so. From machine design to employee hygiene to testing of incoming ingredients, they will do anything, or at least should be doing everything, to protect the safety of the food they produce. And that should include hoses. Whether you realize it or not, you put a lot of stress on your hoses. From high temperature, the liquids they carry, to pressure, to degradation by fats and oils, and abrasion via some of the machines and flooring in your facility, your hoses are exposed to a lot of stress. So to help you determine the right hoses for your application, here's our first speaker, Matthew Davis.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Dave, for having us today. My name is Matthew Davis. I am a Business Development Manager at Parker's Hose Products Division. We're happy to be speaking with you today and give you some insight into our knowledge on food and beverage hoses and the specification of those hoses. So we've got some really good information for you today, so stick with us. I'll be presenting first on the specification process, and I'll show you the itinerary here in just a second. And following me will be Dylan Shamakian, one of our product sales managers covering this particular product line. So this year, we've had a very exciting year in that we've launched our new pure food and beverage line. This launch came in April of this calendar year, so still fresh and new, and one in which we're going to continue to improve, advance, and continue to support. So with that, I will go into the itinerary for today. So I'm leading off on just general food grade hose overview. I'll be taking you through the specification process, the things to look out for, to consider when you are speccing in a hose assembly into your various applications. Some of the things that I'll talk about are going to be the construction considerations, Safety is going to be an underlying theme here today. The technical specifications of the hoses themselves, some of the cleanliness factors to consider, and then I'll wrap up my section by talking about some of the quality standards and compliance considerations to have given the wide variety of applications, markets, and governing boards over the food and beverage industry. Following that, Dylan's going to lead an exciting segment on getting really in-depth into our Pure line. He's going to give you the ins and outs of the series that comprise our portfolio of products. And after that, we'll take some questions. I will note that we have a few survey questions at the end of the presentation here, so taking notes will help you to answer those. Nothing difficult, I promise, but some good questions to take away from the end of our presentation here today. So what makes a food-grade hose unique? Really, ultimately, it's the preservation and the integrity of the material being transferred, whether it's food, a beverage, or a dry or bulk product. Ultimately, what we're seeking to do is prevent the contamination or exposure to any sort of foreign element, whether it's around the application or process or within the transfer or processing of the material itself. That's what's setting these products apart, is the preservation of that material. So at the end of that process, after it's been transferred, you have a clean product and one in which that folks can consume or carry you into your next process within your facility. Now, within the food and beverage industry, there is really a wide range of applications, right? And each of them have their own sort of governing certifications and requirements, everything from dairies to distilleries to grain silos. And we're very mindful and cognizant of that and took that into consideration in developing our portfolio of products. So ultimately, it comes down to how do you navigate all of those different applications and markets, and how do you get down to specifying the right hose and the right assembly for your application. So one of the first things that we like to do at Hose Products Division is we like to put acronyms around our process. Create standard work and a simplified approach to ensuring that you're having consistent methodology each and every time. So we always lead with our STAMP acronym. Now, the STAMP is going to help you to get the right set of criteria to specify the hose in question. So leading that off is the S, or the size of the hose. Following that is going to be the temperature of the hose, or the temperature of the application, both of the media itself and the ambient temperature of the application. You're going to look at the application. So what are we transferring? And then the media, the type of material that's actually going through the hose. And ultimately, to round that off, you're going to look at the pressure. And it doesn't really stop there when it comes to food and beverage applications. There's some additional things that you want to consider, such as the type of flexibility that's required. You're going to have folks handling these assemblies. If you do have them handling, flexibility is key. Weight is key. And you want to make sure that the environment is set up. And if you're worried about scuffing things up, that's another consideration as well. Now, of course, your hoses could be placed, in a fixated position, in which case you want to make sure that it's clamped down appropriately and making sure that it's not going to have any additional movement during processing. And then finally, you're going to want to look at the cover options. We know cleanliness is important. We know wash down, ability, I'll say is another important factor. And we have a number of different cover options as well throughout our portfolio that Dylan will get into here in just a bit. So when it comes to looking at the hose constructions, there's really three main categories that you're going to want to be considering and that make up the construction of a reinforced hose. First, you're going to start with the inner tube, ensuring that you have proper chemical compatibility or media compatibility is of the utmost importance and can lead to an extremely early failure of the assembly itself or to ultimately bad product, which is what we're all trying to avoid, right? That's time lost, that's material lost, things we certainly can get past by utilizing something like the STAMP acronym. Second, you're going to want to look at the reinforcement of the hose. In particular to food and beverage applications, we use materials that aren't going to contaminate, aren't going to degrade or cause failure of the process. So we really look to utilize things like stainless steel reinforcement or a thermoplastic or monofilament reinforcement that will help to ensure that there's no degradation of materials and that we have more robust compatibility. Reinforcement is also interesting because it can dictate the pressure, the kink resistance, and the strength and weight of the hose, which are all important considerations. And then also, and finally, it can have an impact on the vacuum rating or capability if you're drawing a suction or vacuum during the process. The final consideration in terms of the general construction of the hose is going to be your hose cover. So what we're looking at here is the abrasion, the wear, and the temperature capabilities of the covers themselves. We've got 3 different abrasion options because we think that variability is key when it comes to matching the proper hose to the proper application that you are utilizing. Commonly within the food and beverage industry, you're going to see 2 prevalent types of materials, and that's going to be your rubber and your PVC. The Pure line that we've launched here is comprised of rubber-based compounds, and we decided to go that route for the initial launch because typically a rubber reinforced product is going to be a little bit more robust as compared to a PVC option. You're going to have a lot more variability when it comes to the temperature capabilities on both the low and the high end. And typically you're going to be able to rate it to a little bit higher pressure as well. Rubber can be extremely flexible, and we're going to get into what builds into that flexibility. And ultimately what it does provide is a longer service life. Now, if you're looking at PVC, I think, there are still some good options out there, certainly. And there's also some things that take away from that type of material, such as flexibility in lower temperature applications, the useful life of the PVC product in higher tempo applications. It does have a lighter weight, which is great for just ease of use and maneuverability. But that also means that it's going to be much more susceptible to potential kinking, which can cause a disruption and ultimately a failure of the process if it's not caught early, and can lead to an early failure of that particular hose assembly. Now, looking at the overall chemical and material resistance of the hoses, as I had mentioned, kicking things off, we want to preserve those materials. So, contamination prevention is of the utmost importance and is extremely critical when it comes to involving anything food, beverage, or dairy related. But in addition to the general material itself, the things we want to consider are what you see up here in front of you, are ensuring that no taste or odor is transferred to the products or the media that you are utilizing. Some tubing and hose materials can contain plasticizers or chemical agents to facilitate processing and ease of processing and aid in the flexibility of the product. But under certain circumstances, these additives can also leach out into the tubing or hose. And they can appear in potential streams or potential taste or odor of the end product, which ultimately leads to a failure of that product. Now, not all hoses are built the same, and really you have to look at where in the process this hose is going to be utilized. So, whether if it's a transfer type or suction type product, and a product that's ultimately going to be utilized by a consumer, you want the highest quality materials and construction that you can get for consistent end product and longevity of life of your equipment. Now, if we're talking about like a drainage hose or a waste line, it doesn't matter as much. You can utilize probably just about any compatible product without that worry or concern. But if taste or odor are a concern in your application, you certainly want to be mindful of these things. And even it would behoove you to potentially test the product before putting it in your full production line for that end product utilization. The other thing you want to look at is the consideration of the type of cleaning products that are going to be utilized in your process. We want to make sure that it's compatible not only with the tube of the hose itself, but also of the cover to ensure the longevity of the product. When it comes to chemical compatibility, if you are unsure about any of the ingredients and the compatibility of those ingredients with the hose in question, make sure to consult a chemical compatibility chart. Here at Parker, we've got a number of resources, technical resources. We have an engineering team that helps to understand your application and get you the best fit. In any of our catalogs as well, we've got the Parker Catalog 4800 in particular is going to provide you with really a robust technical section on chemical compatibility, and that's really a good place to start if you're beginning your search. So looking at the flexibility of a product, really flexibility is a byproduct of the entire hose construction itself. And the importance here is really, we think on safety. We always want to get to the lowest force of flex as possible, but flexibility is going to depend a lot on the materials of the hose and the tube, the reinforcement, the cover together, and it's going to vary greatly depending upon those materials. So it's an important factor to consider, along with and maybe slightly behind the overall compatibility of the material with the media that you're conveying. So unfortunately, you're not always going to get the most flexible hose, and you're going to want to prioritize compatibility with your media. But flexibility was definitely and is definitely a consideration that we take with each and every product and series that we are making, because we understand that ease of use is of extreme importance when it comes to day-to-day operations and utilization of any one of our hoses. Very closely related and within that family are the flexibility concerns is kink resistance. So the question is, is kink resistance important? And the answer is absolutely yes. Each and every application is going to be different. So understanding the environment in which you are placing your hose is going to be key in the successful really utilization of that assembly. So if you've got a hose that's bending around machinery or potentially has folks stepping on it, or even forklifts running over it, those are all considerations and things that you're going to have to build into the specification of the hose that you're utilizing, because not all hoses are built the same. So if it's a braided reinforced hose, a wire reinforced hose, a thermoplastic reinforced hose, all of those have different benefits depending upon the process, and do play a part within the kink resistance of that hose. Looking at safety, another aspect of safety is going to be the flammability and anti-friction of those hose assemblies. When you're operating at high temperatures, you have to understand that there are risks involved and inherent in any sort of high temperature application. There are governing bodies out there that establish burn ratings and thresholds for certain rubber or thermoplastic materials. Underwriters Laboratories, or UL, is one of those, and they have a wealth of resources available on various materials and the flammable properties of those materials. And this is certainly a consideration for those higher temperature applications. Ultimately, we've got to know what will that material do if it were to be ignited? What are the precautions that you have to take as a processor and how best to avoid getting into a situation where you can alleviate the concerns of a potential hazard that may arise, if that were to ultimately encounter any sort of flammable circumstance. The other consideration when it comes to food and beverage hose is going to be the transfer of any sort of bulk dry material. So your grains, your corns, your wheats, things like that, because you can ultimately build up a static charge as well. And that's definitely a concern. And we were mindful of that in building our portfolio of products to ensure that safety is kept as the highest concern across the portfolio. So looking at weight and the concerns of weight, it certainly plays a part in the day-to-day operation of and use of any hose assembly within your process. The overall weight of the tubing of reinforced hose or the assembly components used in your application always should be examined. And you want to make sure you don't create a situation where hose assemblies could potentially pull on other components, cause early failure on your other components or the fittings themselves. And you want to make sure that you're mindful of any sort of hose that's regularly utilized and hauled by any one person. That plays a part, once again, in the flexibility as well, and just overall ease of use. So if your hose is going to be utilized by people, ensuring that you're mindful of the weight and the length of those particular assemblies should always be considered in the specification process. If your hose is going to be affixed and not moved, ensuring that your assembly is properly supported is going to be an important consideration, especially as you start getting into those 3 and 4 inch ID lines, because if proper clamps or restraints are not used and you've got movement throughout your process, that can certainly lead to a safety issue or, like I said, an early failure of the assembly itself if it's not properly restrained. Next up, looking at pressure considerations, at Hose Products Division, we see a wide range of pressures. Things all the way up, and well above 1,000 psi, going up to 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 psi. So food and beverage applications typically are not hitting those thresholds, but certainly anything with any amount of even a few hundred psi are important to be mindful of. One thing to note is you see here on the slide, pressure is not going to impact the nutritional profile of any product. No vitamins, minerals, nutrients are going to be lost based on the pressure or any sort of impact, on the flavor or the coloring or the texture. But ensuring that you have a properly rated assembly for your application is of the utmost importance. And maintaining supply pressure is particularly important when it comes to wine and beer applications. Applications can range from simple drainage lines, well handled by gravity and involving virtually no pressure, to those requiring a robust product able to manage a full vacuum. You'll need to consider whether your application is one of these extremes or, more than likely it's going to fall, in between there somewhere. Some reinforced tubing can deal adequately with lower pressure situations and others can. It's really going to depend on the application. And it often does depend on the entire hose construction, from the tube material to the reinforcement, to the cover of that particular product. Reinforced hose is frequently called for in pressure and vacuum applications. In fact, depending on the type of reinforcement, whether it's a braid, a fabric, a stainless steel wire, certain types of reinforced hose are well suited for pressure applications, while others are better for vacuum. If you're unsure about the application's pressure or vacuum needs, you'll need to ask questions and conduct tests, or find out, from one of our, support folks to get the right resources to make your decision. As the user and manager of any individual application, definitely want to get your proper research done to avoid situations where you might have a tube or a hose failure or rupture, because that is a significant safety concern, and getting the right application and pressure rating is key. Now, typically, these hoses are rated to a 4-to-1 or 3-to-1 pressure, and what that means is the burst pressure is rated to 3 or 4 times the working pressure. So we build in, a high amount of, I'll say, quality and safety factor into each one of these assemblies to ensure that it's going to perform how it should perform, and it's going to perform for as long as possible in your given application. Looking at the temperature requirements, there's a few things to consider here. And first and foremost, I'd like to say just avoid operating your hose for any continued or really continuously at the max or minimum temperature thresholds. That's going to lead to an earlier degradation of the hose if you're operating it consistently at the maximum temperature or the minimum temperature. And another consideration to keep in mind is that as you increase the temperature, that's going to ultimately have an effect on the pressure rating as well of that particular assembly. So some questions to be mindful of are, can it withstand the temperature of the product traveling through it? Will it lay next to other equipment? So looking at the ambient environment of that particular assembly as it heats up, will that have an impact on anything around it or anyone handling that particular assembly? Will it be outside and subject to both heat and cold? So is there concerns about UV impact on the particular assembly? And will it remain flexible below freezing? And ensuring that you have the right materials and construction of the hose all play a part in the successful temperature specification of your particular hose. So in addition to looking at the right hose and tube materials, there's really 3 critical points to consider in terms of cleanliness. We want to look at the fitting selection. We want to look at your cleaning and disinfection process, and then we also want to ensure that you are regularly inspecting the assembly, visually, and have proper standard work to do so, to ensure that if there is something, you spot it early and prevent a complete failure of your process and equipment. When it comes to fitting selection, there's a few different fitting types that we really suggest, and methodologies that we suggest. You've got your barbed fittings for lower pressure applications, and then you've got 2 other options being crimped and internal expansion methodologies that require some additional equipment, but are going to give you a more permanent affixation to the particular hose. The other style is going to be a quick disconnect hose, and that's really going to be it's widely used, as popular because of the ease of process, the ease of setup, the ease of breakdown, but being mindful that you're going to have some more moving parts in those particular types of fittings. Being quick disconnects means a couple of things. It means that those quick disconnects can fail earlier, and that there's potential for risk of contaminants within those particular fittings as well. So while great and useful, keeping in mind, once again, contamination prevention is key here, and preservation of material is of the utmost importance. When it comes to cleaning and disinfection, it's necessary to keep equipment that comes in contact with any sort of food or beverage material. You want to keep it maintained and disinfected as much as possible. We do, within the resources provided and on our website, provide really a guidelines on how to clean and disinfect hose assemblies and the proper steps and considerations to take in quite some detail. So I encourage everyone on this call to check out that resource as it is extremely helpful in ensuring that you have proper practices in place to ensure that you don't have any sort of contamination or issues with hygienic transfer of any sort of media or material. And then finally, again, looking at the regular inspection of the hose. Hose lines made of rubber and plastic rubber composites are subject to things like natural aging and over prolonged use to material failure, regardless of the material. So ensuring you've got regular checkups and visual inspections of those particular assemblies is going to be key to ensuring that you have consistent uptime and minimal downtime. As hoses are utilized and go through constant temperature and pressure cycles, the materials eventually, will cease to hit the standards of your application. So having routine checkup and inspection will ensure that you're able to consistently produce the product that you need to produce. So looking at the different, fitting types here, as I mentioned before, when it comes to lower pressure and softer tubing, we like to suggest folks consider barb style fittings. Typically, those are paired with clamps, worm gear or, type clamps typically are sufficient. But when it comes to, say, harder tubing materials or larger sizes, you're going to want to consider things like push to connect or compression fittings, as I mentioned, things also like crimp fittings or internal expansion work as well. Ultimately, your fitting choices are going to be determined primarily by your application. Currently, right now, we have an effort and really a process going on where we are qualifying crimp fittings from a few key manufacturers and partners with our hoses. So we provide specifications on how to crimp, and we'll be providing specifications on how to properly crimp fittings onto your hose assemblies to ensure that you have the proper specifications reached, and it ensures the integrity and consistent use of our hose assemblies with paired fittings as well. Across different regions and across different applications, you'll likely come across two primary, fitting processes. The first is going to be crimp, which I had mentioned we are underway with qualifying and providing support on for our particular hoses. And then there's also internal expansion. Both of these methodologies are good and can be favorable in different applications. Crimp fittings are best for hardwall or softwall hoses, so either choice. And a properly crimped hose wall will cause disruption to the hose itself. The wire helix will resist the collapse as you are compressing that fitting onto that hose to ensure that you have proper crimp. So getting the right variables in place to ensure that the right specification is hit is critical for a crimped fitting. When it comes to internal expansion, really that's going to be best for your softwall application, softwall hoses, and it is acceptable on hardwall hoses, and I don't want to give that impression that it's not. It certainly is, and properly expanded insertions will cause little disruption to the hose wall. In this case, contrary to a crimp fitting, the wire helix acts as an internal shell as you are internally expanding that fitting onto that hose. So earlier I spoke about the wide variety of markets and applications when it comes to food and beverage processes. There are a number of governing bodies across these different markets and across these different applications, and we are very mindful of that when it came to the development of our portfolio of products. And we ensure that we are hitting the latest and greatest when it comes to the safety considerations and having our hoses properly certified amongst these different governing bodies and certification providers was key and critical to us in this launch. First up, looking at the Food and Drug Administration, they regulate food contact materials. and all materials intended to be in contact with food. So our hoses are FDA compliant. We actually take it a step further, and we have our hoses. Our hoses are good manufacturing practice certified as well. Now that's going to be really an additional certification on top of the standard FDA compliance or certification. Good manufacturing practice includes, as I said, a step further. You're looking at the factory cleanliness. You're looking at material traceability. You're looking at the quality systems that are in place within that manufacturing process of the hose itself. It means that the whole hose meets the FDA requirement for material construction, and it's not just the tube. Sometimes, you'll see where the tube is compliant, but maybe the reinforcement in the cover, meaning the whole hose, is not compliant, and that works certainly in some applications. But the GMP certification takes it a step further. It says that the product will not absorb media, nor will the media extract any non-regulated or non-permissible substance from the hose, and that no layer of the hose will migrate or contain any substance that will migrate into the media. So as far as we know, there's only a few folks providing this additional certification, and we are certainly one of them, and one in which we're proud to put on our literature and ultimately achieve with this portfolio of products. This is a third-party audited certification, and is definitely a robust certification, and means you've got a high-quality hose in your application. A few other things to consider. Certainly one that's picking up traction here in the United States is the NSF certification, and this organization establishes minimum health and sanitation requirements for materials used in the making of commercial food equipment and component parts. So as I said, this one is picking up a bit more traction, but you'll see it more often than not in water-based applications. ISO 9001 specifies requirements for a quality management system where an organization needs to demonstrate its ability to consistently provide product that meets customer and applicable regulatory requirements. We are ISO 9001 certified. And then looking at the next couple, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, regulates manufacturing, packaging, and handling practices in the agricultural food industry. So certainly one that is relevant within the processes of food processing. And then finally, we do have a PTFE product. So one we're mindful of is USP, or the United States Pharmacopoeia, which is a nonprofit scientific organization that develops quality standards for prescription and over-the-counter medicines and other healthcare products manufactured in the United States. So there's definitely a lot of regulation within these different markets within this industry as a whole, one in which that we're going to continue to be mindful of and reach for the highest quality standards, so that when you are purchasing a Parker product, you're getting the highest quality product out there, and one in which that you can be confident in terms of the quality systems that are in place, in terms of the materials that are in place, in the support and processing of our products. So, as it says here, from baked goods to distilling spirits to the facilities in which they are processed, Parker can help to optimize your manufacturing process by ensuring that we have high quality product, ensuring that we are taking the proper precautions, and helping you to specify the right product for your applications, given the diversity of applications that are out there. So with that, I will hand it on over to Dylan Shamakian, who's going to give us a more robust overview on the products themselves.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the pass off there. And we are going to move on and start to talk a little bit about Parker Hannifin specific products. So you got a great overview on a lot of the things that you should consider for your hoses. And now we're going to look a little bit more specifically into our portfolio and what really makes it unique. So when we launched this portfolio, our goal was to bring in a pretty large amount of hoses that will meet a lot of different industry demands. So, and that comes to not just the kinds of hoses available, but the sizes of the hoses available as well. So this was a pretty big product launch from us, launching over 40 hoses into the marketplace. So our goal really was to provide options where our customers can find the optimal hose for their application. Moving on here, we launched a product line that is simple, clean, and safe. It's simple because it's color-coded, and we tried to really pick the hoses that are needed out there without having too much available. So really just getting down to what is necessary to meet the applications. You heard Matt talk a little bit about cleanliness, and all of these hoses are made on a stainless steel mandrel, with one exception that I'll talk about in a little bit, in clean facilities. So the manufacturing plants themselves where these hoses are made look a lot like a food facility with cleanliness. And then, obviously to provide products that are very safe, and safety obviously very, very important in today's world, and all of our products were designed with safety in mind. So a little more about our pure food and beverage hose. One of the things that really is important with rubber is you could think of various rubber compounds as like baking a cake. So, there's a lot of different cakes out there, and there's a lot of different rubber compounds. So what's really important in the rubber world is that not all rubbers are created equally. So what I can say for the rubbers that we are using on our side, they are of the highest grade. They are not a low cost type of rubber. Some of the cheaper rubbers you'll see out there have a lot of fillers in there and a lot of clays. Well, our rubber is compounded to be very, very high grade, top of the line stuff. So that is key, especially on those inner tubes, because that's what's in contact with your food, for really making a great hose, among other things. We also have a range of colors, pressures, and sizes available in this line that covers a ton of different industry standards. And then we also have hoses that can take a full suction, and ones that have kink resistance, that they're designed for kink resistance, and I'll explain some of the differences and what that means as we move forward here. And then all of these products are designed to be cleaned. Just like anything else, the more you take care of these assets, the more that you clean them, the longer they'll last. Obviously, food hoses are not necessarily cheap, so we want to make sure that we're keeping them clean, and we're inspecting them, and on a regular cadence. Therefore, we extend the life out of those hoses. So Matt talked a little bit about the GMP certification that we have for our hoses. And for the most part, all of the hoses that we're going to talk about here are already certified, and our 7640 hoses are soon to be certified. So what exactly does that mean, and why does that help us stand out from the competition? Well, to get this certification, it's very stringent, and it's very difficult to get. So first, where you're manufacturing the hoses has to have a very high cleanliness rating. You also have to have a robust material traceability process in place and active. That way, if there's ever an issue, we'd be able to go back and trace it back down to a specific lot of hose or specific run of hose. And so a lot of hoses out there, lower cost hoses, only the inner tube is really FDA rated. But in order to get the GMP certification, the inner tube, the reinforcement, and the cover all have to be FDA certified. So that means, very high-end materials all the way throughout, the inner tube, the reinforcement, and the cover. And, that way, you just know your foodstuffs going through that hose are going to be in good shape. Even if we have a reinforcement issue or if the inner tube gets worn out, we know that there's going to be no contamination that comes through any part of that hose. And then, the last point there, we talk about over time, things can migrate through a hose. So if a hose cover is not FDA certified, and then, years into service, that cover starts to have migration through the reinforcement in the inner tube, that can affect the food product. So in this case, if it's GMP certified, there is no way for any contamination to come from that hose. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the cover options. So this is something we're pretty excited about. And I like to think of this as a good, better, and best option. So the pure standard is vulcanized rubber. So high grade, UV resistant, vulcanized rubber, and it's a smooth cover. So certainly a good option. However, there's not really these extra features in it that make the Pro and the Plus special. So that's just a flat rubber cover. Now, when you go into the Pure Pro, you start to get some enhancements. First off, you get a corrugated cover. So corrugated hoses typically have a lower force to flex, and operators typically like these hoses a lot because they're a little bit easier to handle. That corrugation allows the hose to flex, and it gives it a really nice feel. So in the industrial hose world, these hoses are typically handled by human beings, and operators, typically want to feel the hose, see how it moves, see how it flexes, for them to say, this is something that we want. The other thing about a Pro cover is it actually has a UHMWPE film over the cover. So that does a couple things. That one makes the hose easier to clean on the cover, and then also creates less friction when you're moving it across the ground. So it'll slide around the ground easier. And we talk about safety, and we talk about operators that are actually handling the hose. They definitely appreciate that if it's moving across the ground, because some of these hoses are really big and long. And then our best option is the Pure Plus. So this actually has convoluted a PVC exterior. So a really deep corrugation. So the most extreme flex that you can put into this. And then also it's got the least surface area, right, compared to a regular hose. It moves across the ground the easiest. This is our Plus hose is really the most superior food hose that's out there. So let's get in a little bit more to the line here. So the 7630 line comes in our Pure, Pro, and Plus covers, and you'll see that noted in the product series with how we do our product numbers with the P and the PL. And what makes this unique is it has a white butyl inner tube. So these hoses are typically what you're going to see in breweries, and butyl is a pretty versatile rubber compound. So if you, in the breweries, for example, you'll typically see also a lot of red hoses. So the 7630 line, we picked a color out that is kind of the most standard out there. But also, we're giving you some options here for a good, better, or best as well. And these come in 1 inch to 4 inch. And the key really for these food hoses generally, what makes them different is that inner tube material. So you'll see a lot of EPDM covers, but for a butyl tube, that's what makes the 7630 the 7630. So moving on to this next line. So 7631 and 7632 are also Pure Bev hoses, but instead of having a metal helical wire in there, this actually has a monofilament reinforcement. So if you do run this over with a forklift, this hose will actually bounce back. where if you have a metal helical wire, it'll pretty much ruin the hose. You'll have to throw it away. So a lot of breweries and a lot of wineries actually prefer this kind of hose because if it does kink, it'll pop back out to its old form. So you might be, depending on the environment that this hose is in, you might be able to get a lot more life out of this hose if you're prone to kinking your hoses or they're prone to get run over. So we also kind of launched this with a new to market color. So it's got this really vibrant purple color, and a lot of people in their food facilities have a lot of pride and they want things to look visually nice. So we always had that in mind when we launched this. And this comes in both 150 and 250 PSI and 1 inch to 3 inch. So that's the difference between the 1 and the 2 is the higher pressure. So you'll see a lot of wineries actually want that 250 PSI version. And this hose is also was launched recently, the 7650P. So it only comes in a Pro cover. It's got a butyl tube, but in addition to the butyl tube, it has a UHMWPE inner tube. So what does that do? Well, if you're dealing with really high proof alcohols or even some chemical applications, that UHMWPE will give you some additional life. So this is a 150 PSI hose, and it's also got a pretty wide range of available, 3/4 inch up to 4 inch. And this is our Pure Spirits hose, and really unique product because of that umpy cover as well as an umpy tube. So a lot of layers to this hose. So kind of transitioning out of the Pure Beverage hoses, we're going to talk about the Pure Food and Transfer hoses. So now we're talking about things that are designed not necessarily for various beverages, whether it's adult beverages, but now we're talking probably more regular, kind of the other category of foods. So dairy products, cooking oils, abrasive materials, oily sauces, etc. So starting with the 7620, this hose is launched specifically for dry food products. So this hose is really designed for internal abrasion and also not, at the same time, not to get a static buildup. So if you think about a grain elevator, you know, a static charge or a static buildup can be an extremely dangerous situation. So this hose actually acts as like a grounding type of hose because of that black cover that is designed to conduct electricity. So it's a little bit of a lower pressure hose, but it is designed for dry materials. So moving on to these blue 7640 hoses, these are nitrile inner tube hoses. So whether it's in the food hose industry or in the industrial hose version, the industrial hose markets, nitrile is what you think of when you think about oils or petroleums. This is white nitrile, and when you're thinking about cheese or dairy or anything that's going to be an oily type of food, that is when you need a white nitrile inner tube. So this hose comes in both the pure version and a pro version, 1 inch to 4 inch. And what really we have to think about out in the food world is, what is this inner tube made out of? Is this inner tube the ideal inner tube for the food stuff going through it? And then finally, another new hose to the Parker family is the Pure PPFE hose. So we have the 7660 that you see there on the left and the 7660P with the Pro cover. So these are pretty unique hoses, 1/2 inch up to 2 inch. They can deal with really high temperatures. You'll see they go from -40 all the way up to 302 degrees. So high purity chemicals, pharmaceutical applications, cosmetics like lotions for makeup. That's really what this hose is targeting and made for. The Pro version actually has a conductive tube and a conductive cover to help with that static electricity as well. So pretty excited to launch this with our product line as well. And then this is Pure Washdown hose. This is kind of like an accessory to the food hoses. So this actually isn't. These are not actually for consuming food out of or to be in contact with food that's being consumed. But these hoses are actually for washing down equipment and being in a food environment. So it's 7680. It's available in 1/2 inch, 3/4, and 1 inch. The most common size that you'll see out there for washdown hoses is 3/4 inch. And washdown hoses are a really, really big market. You'll see them in breweries and chicken and beef processing plants. They are pretty high volume. They get used daily to wash the equipment. So what's really unique about this product is a couple things. One, the inner tube is an FDA compliant inner tube. So you'll see that is a white EPDM inner tube. And it's available in blue and white covers because they're both in demand out there in the industry. So that was a big upgrade for us to include it with an FDA compliant inner tube. The other thing that's really nice about this hose is it is already certified with Parker HY series fittings, and you can crimp it on Parker crimpers. So this is launched with crimp specs ready to go. So 1/2 inch up to 1 inch, blue and white, and a really big marketplace that you'll see out there. That pretty much covers our hoses that are available in this portfolio. Do we have some questions out there from the information that we learned about today?
Yeah, thank you, Dylan, and Matthew, too. Now, we normally have Q&A at the end here. We're going to probably only get to one question, but we have a new feature. If you do type a question in, we'll get it to our speakers, and they'll answer it on demand. And if you or any of your coworkers watch this webinar on demand and you type a question in, we will still get it and get it onto our speakers for on-demand answering. And here's one that has come in. What is your pressure safety factor on these hoses?
So the safety factor will vary depending on the hose. The most common safety factor is a 4-to-1. You'll also see some safety factors as a 3-to-1. We do provide that information in the literature, so that's available. One thing I will say about safety factor that's important is the safety factor is for the day that the hose is born when it's assembled perfectly. So that safety factor will actually decrease over time as the hose is getting worn and torn and being used in the application. So the safety factor is built in, but for a hose that's been used for a while, it's not necessarily true that safety factor will be the same as it was when that hose was brand new.
Okay.
So, yeah, so 250 PSI hose. Yep. Go ahead.
Sure. Come in, guys. Can you use Parker's crimped fittings with Pure Wash?
Yes, you can. With Pure Wash, it is qualified with HY series, and you can use it on Parker crimpers as well. So those crimp specs are published on Parker Crimp Source, and they're available now. So the answer to that is yes.
Okay. Are your hoses phthalate-free?
I believe they are. I'm pretty sure to be phthalate-free. That's part of some of those certifications that we're talking about before. To get those certifications, the hoses need to be phthalate-free.
Yes, that is correct. They are phthalate-free. That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Do these hoses meet USDA compliance standards?
So I'm pretty sure the 7640 series does. The USDA compliance standard is used quite a bit in the dairy industry, and that 7640 of those blue hoses is what's the hose that's really targeted for that industry, being a nitrile inner tube. So I'm pretty sure those do have a USDA certification to them.
What packaging lengths are available?
So for the most part, the large bore hoses, so not the washdown hoses, but the large bore industrial food hoses here, the pure food hoses, come in 130-foot lengths.
Now, we do
so
sell...
That's from Parker.
Yes. So we would sell direct at 130-foot length, but any one of our distributors has the ability to cut, and couple, and we're happy to direct you to folks within your regions of operations for shorter lengths.
Okay, thank you guys. But we've just come up on the hour, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. We will be sending you an email shortly with instructions on how to download the slides from today's webinar. And as I said, if you watch this webinar again, or if a coworker watches it on demand, go ahead and type a question into that Ask a Question box, and electronically we'll receive it and we'll forward it to the proper speaker for answering. We also will let you know when this webinar is available for on-demand viewing, probably within 24 hours. And the next screen should be a very quick survey we hope you will take, but that will do it for us. This webinar is over, and thank you all for tuning in today.